Elaine Mitchell thought she had finally found peace when she married Paul Steven Mack, but just weeks after their wedding, she uncovered a chilling truth. The man she loved wasn't who he claimed to be. Paul wasn't an environmental scientist or a devoted husband. He was a fugitive, a master manipulator, and the prime suspect in a string of disappearances stretching back decades. What began as a whirlwind romance quickly unraveled into a real-life nightmare as Elaine realized she had married a serial killer hiding in plain sight. Elaine Mitchell had always believed in second chances. After a difficult breakup and years of dating disappointments, she had nearly given up on love altogether. Then she met Paul Steven Mack. He wasn't flashy or overly charming. In fact, it was his calm, steady demeanor that drew her in. He had a quiet confidence, the kind that made her feel safe. They met at a farmer's market just outside Sacramento. He introduced himself as an environmental scientist working on water preservation projects. His stories about traveling for fieldwork and studying ecosystems fascinated her. Elaine found herself eagerly waiting for his calls, excited by his attention and gentle persistence. Paul was attentive and generous. He always paid in cash, never made a big show of wealth, but there was something old-fashioned about him. He opened doors, brought her thoughtful gifts, and listened with genuine interest. Their dates felt like something out of a romance novel. Sunset walks, picnics in secluded parks, long conversations that seemed to go on for hours. Within weeks, Elaine was smitten. Her friends voiced concern about how quickly things were moving, but she brushed them off. Paul made her feel seen, valued, even cherished. After years of feeling like an afterthought, it was intoxicating. 3 months after they met, Paul proposed. It was simple, sweet, and without hesitation. He claimed he had no family to speak of, just a few distant cousins he hadn't spoken to in years. Elaine's family was small, and while surprised at the speed, they supported her. The wedding was modest, held in a quiet garden venue with only a handful of close friends. Paul wore a navy blue suit and never stopped smiling. Elaine believed she had found her forever. The first few weeks of marriage felt like a dream. Paul cooked dinner most nights, left her notes before leaving for early morning fieldwork, and seemed devoted to making her happy. But gradually, Elaine began to notice small cracks in the picture-perfect life they were building. Paul was incredibly private. He never let her do his laundry and kept his briefcase locked. If she asked about his work, he gave vague answers. When she offered to drive him to the airport for a trip, he refused, saying he had arranged everything already. Elaine tried to rationalize it. Some people were just more guarded. Maybe he had a hard past he wasn't ready to talk about. Still, oddities piled up. One night she woke to find him missing from bed. She found him in the garage standing silently by the trunk of his car, which was open just enough for her to see heavy-duty plastic bags stacked inside. When she asked what he was doing, he smiled and said he was organizing camping gear. She didn't press him further, but her unease grew. Elaine didn't want to admit it, but something about her new husband felt off. He was affectionate and present, yet parts of his life were completely sealed off. As the weeks went by, curiosity gave way to suspicion. What had once felt like romantic mystery now seemed like something darker. She began to wonder if she really knew the man she had just married. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when Elaine sat down to watch a true crime show rerun on television. She had always been interested in unsolved mysteries and missing persons cases. It was a strange hobby, but one she found oddly comforting. She never imagined it would collide so directly with her own life. As she half listened, folding laundry in the living room, the screen flashed with a composite sketch of a man wanted for questioning in connection with a 1987 disappearance in Ohio. The name listed was Steven Mack. Elaine's hands froze mid-fold. The face on the screen looked disturbingly familiar. The jawline, the eyes, the hair, it looked like Paul. At first she told herself she was imagining it. The sketch was grainy, and the image stayed on screen. For only a few seconds, still it left her deeply unsettled. She rewound the segment and paused the screen, staring at it. The resemblance was undeniable. Her heart pounded as a wave of confusion washed over her. Paul had mentioned living in Ohio briefly years ago. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but now that memory took on a new weight, trying to calm. Herself, Elaine decided to search for more information online. She typed in Steven Mack, Ohio missing woman 1987. Several old news articles popped up. They all mentioned a woman named Carla Harris who had vanished after meeting a man she described to friends as charming, smart, and intense. Witnesses claimed she had been dating a man named Steven Mack just before she disappeared. No body was ever found. The case went cold. Elaine scrolled through article after article, her stomach twisting. The timeline fit. The name matched. The physical description sounded eerily like her husband. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was a different person with a similar name and face. But doubt had already taken root. That night, while Paul was asleep, Elaine quietly searched through the filing cabinet in his home office. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that she needed answers. Among tax papers and warranty receipts, she found an envelope tucked at the very back of the drawer. Inside were documents that didn't make sense. One was a social security card under the name Paul Steven Mack, but the number seemed wrong. Another was a birth certificate from New Jersey, though Paul had said he was born in Colorado. Unsure what to do next, Elaine reached out to a college friend who worked at the California DMV. She explained that she was helping her husband with insurance paperwork and needed help verifying a few things. Her friend agreed to take a quick look. The response she got the next day left her shaken. According to the DMV system, Paul Steven Mack's license had only been issued recently, just 2 months before they met. There was no prior record of him in California or any other state under that name. Elaine realized then that she didn't know who her husband really was. The man she married had no past that could be verified, no family, and now, possibly, a connection to a decades-old disappearance. Her instincts told her something was very wrong, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. Elaine took her concerns to the police, careful to present her findings without alerting Paul. She explained everything: his odd behavior, the sketch on the TV, the inconsistent documents, and the eerie feeling that had grown stronger with each passing day. The officer she spoke with listened attentively and promised to look into it. Though they couldn't open a full investigation based solely on suspicion, her detailed report gave them enough reason to dig deeper. A week later, a detective contacted her with news that confirmed her worst fears. The man she knew as Paul Steven Mack had no digital footprint before 1990. Not a single credit report, employment record, or medical file existed before that time. This was rare, especially for someone claiming to have lived and worked in the US his entire life. The detective also found a disturbing pattern of missing women in the Midwest and the West Coast. Women who had dated men with similar names: Paul S. Mack, Stephen P. Mack, even just Steve. All the women had vanished without a trace. The cases were spread across several states and years. Most had grown cold, but Elaine noticed the disturbing similarities. Each woman bore a physical resemblance: brunette, average height, outgoing personalities. Many had been reported missing shortly after beginning a new relationship. None of their bodies had been found, and none of their families had heard from them again. As the investigation expanded, detectives focused on fingerprint records. In one of the cold cases from Ohio, investigators had recovered partial prints from the victim's apartment door. At the time, they didn't match anyone in the system. Now they had something to compare them to. With Elaine's help, the police obtained a coffee mug Paul had used and lifted fingerprints from it. A few days later, the results came in. The prints were a match, not to anyone named Paul Steven Mack, but to a man named Randall James Armstrong, who had a criminal record under that name. Decades earlier, he had served time for assault and battery in Pennsylvania, but had vanished after being released on parole in the early 1980s. That was the last time anyone had seen or heard of him, until now. The revelation was staggering. Elaine had unknowingly married a man using a stolen identity. Worse, he was now connected to multiple unsolved disappearances. Authorities began retracing his steps, using his known aliases to uncover more potential victims. The timeline painted a horrifying picture. Wherever Paul or Randall had lived, women had gone missing. Still, there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him. The cases were old, the trails cold. What police needed was something concrete, something physical. They asked Elaine to stay close to him, to monitor his behavior, and to try to gather more information, if she felt safe doing so. Elaine agreed, though the fear never left her. She returned home pretending everything was normal. Every smile, every dinner, every passing hug felt like a performance. Inside, she was terrified, but she was also determined. If he was guilty, she would help stop him. No more women would vanish, not if she could help it. Elaine lived in constant tension, pretending to be the devoted wife while quietly gathering evidence. Every moment with Paul felt like a high-stakes game. She couldn't afford to slip, not even for a second. He was still affectionate, still calm, and still perfectly composed, which only made things more unsettling. There was no sign of guilt, no hint of the darkness the police suspected. But Elaine knew now that behind his gentle demeanor lay a past, filled with secrets and likely with blood. The police advised her to keep an eye out for anything unusual in the house, any locked spaces, hidden compartments, or out-of-place items. She immediately thought of the trunk in the garage, the one Paul had always been so protective of. She had seen him near it on more than one late night, always with an excuse that never quite added up. Until now, she hadn't dared to open it. But with the truth about his identity confirmed, she knew the trunk might hold the answers they needed. One weekend, Paul left town on what he said was a field project. It was the first time in weeks Elaine felt free to act. With shaking hands, she walked into the garage and approached the trunk. It was large, made of heavy metal, and secured with a padlock. She found the key hidden in the back of a kitchen drawer, taped to the bottom of a tin labeled "spare screws." Heart pounding, she unlocked the trunk and slowly lifted the lid. Inside, the air was stale and faintly metallic. The first layer contained tools, rope, duct tape, and gloves. But underneath, the contents turned sinister. There were several Ziploc bags filled with hair, each labeled with a woman's name and a year. Elaine's breath caught in her throat. Beneath that were old driver's licenses, some cracked and faded. Most featured women who looked vaguely familiar, like faces from old missing person flyers. She counted at least 7 IDs. At the bottom of the trunk were dozens of photographs, some printed on aging Polaroid paper. Many showed women smiling beside Paul in casual settings. But some were more disturbing, women lying unconscious or possibly worse in motel rooms, their eyes closed, limbs awkwardly arranged. Elaine couldn't look away. These were trophies, collected over years. Each item in the trunk hinted at another victim, another life taken without a trace. She took photos of everything with her phone, careful not to disturb the order. Then, locking the trunk and replacing the key, she drove straight to the police station. The evidence she turned over was overwhelming. Officers moved quickly, a warrant was issued, surveillance was increased. And 2 days later, Paul Steven Mack, real name Randall Armstrong, was arrested at a Sacramento bus terminal. He carried with him a duffel bag, a burner phone, and several fake IDs. Elaine watched from a distance as he was taken into custody, his calm mask never once slipping. For weeks she had lived in fear, uncertain if he suspected her. Now she felt both relief and horror. The man she had married was gone, but the shadow he left behind was just beginning to unravel. The arrest of Paul Steven Mack made headlines across the country. Reporters quickly unearthed the dark and tangled story of a man who had lived under a stolen identity for more than a decade while evading capture for crimes stretching back nearly 20 years. Elaine watched the coverage from her home, numb and exhausted. She had played a central role in exposing him, but the reality of who he truly was left her shaken in ways she couldn't yet process. In the weeks that followed, the police uncovered more damning evidence. DNA collected from the contents of the trunk matched biological samples taken from 2 unsolved homicide cases in Nevada and Ohio. The women, both reported missing in the late 1980s, had been presumed dead, though their bodies were never recovered. Now at last, they had a name to tie to their disappearances. Paul, real name Randall Armstrong, had carefully built a life around deception, weaving through different states, changing names, always staying just far enough ahead of the law. The trial began 6 months after his arrest. Prosecutors charged him with multiple counts of first-degree murder, identity theft, and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. The courtroom was packed with journalists, former acquaintances, and the families of missing women who had waited decades for answers. Elaine sat quietly in the gallery, separated from the man she once called her husband by only a few feet and a wall of armed guards. She could barely recognize him anymore. His calm demeanor remained, but the mask had cracked. He no longer looked charming. He looked cold. During the trial, the prosecution presented the physical evidence, photographs, hair samples, IDs, as well as the DNA matches and fingerprint links. Witnesses testified about the women who had vanished after meeting him, including co-workers, family members, and old neighbors. Elaine herself took the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but she spoke clearly. She told the jury how they met, how he had charmed her, and how she discovered the truth. Her testimony was one of the most powerful moments of the entire case. After several weeks, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced Randall Armstrong to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. There was no dramatic outburst, no sign of remorse from him, just a slight nod as the sentence was read. For Elaine and the victims' families, it marked the end of a nightmare. In the aftermath, Elaine struggled to rebuild her life. The house where she had once dreamed of a future now felt like a crime scene. She moved away, changed her last name, and disappeared from the public eye. Offers came in from journalists and documentary producers, but she declined them all. She needed time to heal, to figure out who she was outside of the story that had consumed her. But the legacy of her bravery lived on. Police reopened several cold cases, using what they learned from Paul's patterns to search for more victims. Her actions had helped uncover a serial predator hiding in plain sight, proving that even the most ordinary life can mask unspeakable darkness, and that sometimes love can be the most dangerous disguise of all.